There are a lot of ideas in Tolkien's works that he really digs into. Themes like heroism, sacrifice, leadership are all explored fairly comprehensively, but there are other ideas that Tolkien suggests, but never fully explains. And I actually find that these partially clarified, intentionally ambiguous themes tend to be more interesting than the ones that he explores in depth, if not a bit frustrating. And I think that the best example of this is the idea of fate versus free will in Middle-earth. Fate can be found everywhere in Tolkien's works, from the doom of Mandos, the destiny of Aragorn, or the prophetic dreams of Faramir, but there is also a heavy emphasis placed on the ways in which the choices that these characters make shape the lives that they live. But how can these two ideas coexist? How can the path of the world be laid out from its inception? How can characters be destined for certain great deeds while still fundamentally being able to choose their own destinies? How can these paradoxical ideas both be true in the story? And why would Tolkien put such a complex, nigh unsolvable problem at the heart of his work? Well, I certainly don't have all of the answers, but today I want to explore the ways in which Tolkien presents free will and fate in Middle-earth, the ways in which these ideas conflict, and how oftentimes they work together to enrich the story that Tolkien was telling. Now, speaking of complex and nigh unsolvable problems, I'm sure that if you've clicked on this video, you've also occasionally wondered how you would go about restarting civilization after the complete collapse of society. And fortunately, today's sponsor is going to be able to help you out with that. You may not have guessed this about me, but I love a good book. But today, I'm here to talk to you about one book in particular, the book, The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding a Civilization. This 400-page masterpiece covers everything from the basics of agriculture and cooking, to engineering and tools, medicine, communication, even society, culture, and games. But what really caught my attention with this was the illustrations. These full-color, vintage steampunk meets medieval illustrations are just incredible, and the conversational tone manages to pack in a ton of information without ever feeling like a lecture. This book is huge, it is beautiful, and for you more careful readers, you might even find a couple references to our old pal Tolkien. And if it wasn't enough to lose yourself in the information and the illustrations, this book might have more than a few secrets to share with you. It actually has a hidden quest, ranging from entry-level puzzles to more advanced ones, and as of now, only 7 people have completed the whole thing. Just look for butterflies, get cracking on decoding the puzzles, and see if you can find the secret website, join the Order of Seekers, and maybe even get sent real rewards. From history to technology to the specifics of how to build your very own rite of passage or tell a good story, the book has something for everyone. If you're interested in checking them out, you can do so through the link in my description, and be sure to use my code or my QR code on screen. You are not going to want to miss out on this absolute wealth of incredibly fun information. Thanks so much to the folks over at Hungry Minds for sponsoring this video. Let's start by clearing up what I mean when I say free will and fate. Fate is most generally defined as a force that predetermines events. Whether that force be God, another deity, or another cosmic force altogether, fate is the thing that unavoidably sets your path before you. So it is that Oedipus Rex was fated to kill his father and marry his mother, and no matter how much individual will he exerted to avoid that fate, it was unavoidable. And this concept of fate, in one form or another, seems to appear endlessly in Tolkien's works. At the very beginning of time, Iluvatar and the Ainur spirits created a symphony that shaped the physical world and all that would happen within it, from its first moments to its cataclysmic end. With that in mind, we kind of have to infer that there is some sort of a greater plan laid out, even if only Iluvatar is aware of it. One of the Valar, Mandos, is even called the Doomsman of the Valar, the word doom in this context drawing from the archaic definition of meaning a judgment or a decree. Mandos was the final deciding word in all matters of fate, and his wife Vaire, much like the Greek fates themselves, wove all of time and history into her great tapestries in the halls of the dead. Throughout all of Middle-earth, there is a sense of fate being at work, eerily similar to the workings of weird in the tales of pre-Christian Europe. Typically translating into the English word fate, weird is actually derived from the Old English term weordan, which means to happen, or what will become. So devoid of the modern connotations of the term fate, which is a force that predetermines events, weird is much more existentially simple. Weird is what will be. And all of Middle-earth is permeated by this sense that the things that are happening are what were meant to be. But at the same time as all of this weird fate is happening, the inhabitants of Middle-earth aren't simply puppets. In fact, in the creation of his second-born, humankind, Iluvatar granted them a special dispensation from the shackles of fate. Therefore, he willed that the hearts of men should seek beyond the world, and should find no rest therein, but they should have a virtue to shape their life amid the powers and chances of the world, beyond the music of the Ainur, which is as fate to all things else. Here, Tolkien makes it clear that, at least according to the Elvish legends, which are the best record of this time that we have, fate is real, and it was laid out during the music of the Ainur. But, as part of Iluvatar's gift to mankind, they are permitted to act outside of the boundaries of fate. They have been granted the right to choose their own destiny. But this leaves us with the interesting question, what does it mean to be non-human? What is free will to the creatures like elves, who are in fact governed by fate? Now, first of all, we should lay it out that elves do in fact have free will. Despite their ties to physical creation and the pull of weird that they feel, elves are able to make independent choices. They are able to decide what they do and how they will act. But the best way that I've been able to interpret it is that elves are in fact limited when it comes to how the consequences of their actions are able to be realized. And the best example of this is the elf lord Feanor. Feanor was the creator of the remarkably beautiful Silmaril gems, and when the light of the two trees was extinguished by the Dark Lord Morgoth, the Valar called upon him to give up these Silmarils. The Silmarils had, after all, captured the light of those two trees, and by taking the Silmarils, the Valar may have been able to grant light back into the world. The Valar asked Feanor to give them the Silmarils, but Feanor replied, "This thing I will not do of free will." Here, Tolkien and Feanor make it as clear as they possibly could that Feanor does have free will. He is able to choose whether or not he gives the Silmarils up, even when it is the greatest powers in all of Arda asking him to give them up. And we know that he has this free choice because he says it, and also because he chooses wrongly. He chooses the more selfish option. If the Valar could have forced his hand here, they may very well have. But Feanor's free choice here does not mean that he has escaped fate. This is made obvious later on, when despite Feanor's best efforts to hold on to them, Morgoth takes the Silmarils. The Silmarils had passed away, and all one it may seem whether Feanor had said yea or nay to Yavanna. Yet, had he said yea at the first, it may be that his after-deeds would have been other than they were. But now the doom of the Noldor drew near. Fate had long since decided that Feanor was going to lose the Silmarils. That was an unavoidable fact. But in his narration, Tolkien leaves it kind of open to speculation as to whether the fallout of the stealing of the Silmarils, the doom of Mandos, Feanor's oath, Feanor's death, and the dissolution of his children, he leaves it open to wonder if all of those terrible things may have been avoided if Feanor had chosen to respond to the pleadings of the Valar differently. He never could have held on to the Silmarils forever, but if he had chosen to give them up to the Valar to do the unselfish thing, his own life and his own happiness may have turned out quite differently. While there are certain facts of fate that the elves are eternally bound to, they have the ability to choose how they will respond to that destiny, and that may be all the more telling about who they really are. But even for humans who were granted the special ability to choose their own paths, it doesn't mean that they can escape Weird entirely. In the pages of the Silmarillion, we see the ways in which fate plagues many mortal people, especially the doomed children of Hurin. Hurin was a human elf friend who was captured by Morgoth, but he refused to give up his secrets and even mocked the Dark Lord, and so Morgoth cursed him, saying, "Upon all whom you love, my thought shall weigh as a cloud of doom, and it shall bring them down into darkness and despair. Wherever they go, evil shall arise. Whenever they speak, their words shall bring ill counsel. Whatsoever they do shall turn against them. They shall die without hope, cursing both life and death." Now this curse is particularly interesting because it is not a curse or a doom granted by Mandos, the preordained doomsman of the Valar. Rather, this comes from Morgoth, and so I think we do have to question the particular language used and what exactly this curse means for the people that it is laid upon. After all, it's not like Morgoth can go back against Ilúvatar's wishes and take away these humans' right to choose their own destiny. To my understanding, then, the doom that Morgoth places here is not on the actions of the children of Hurin themselves, but rather on the outcome of their actions. Wherever they go, their deeds will turn evil. Every piece of counsel that they grant will lead people astray. So, when Morgoth says that the children of Hurin will die without hope, that is not a proclamation of fate, because that's not his right to proclaim. It is, however, a prediction, because despite its limitations, the doom of Morgoth lends quite an impact. The full brunt of this doom is felt by Hurin's son, Turin. From its very earliest days, Turin's life feels completely beyond his control. He's sent from his home and his mother's care, he's raised by the king of a distant kingdom, and just as he's beginning to make a life for himself there, he accidentally kills one of the king's closest advisors and flees before he can face the consequences. He falls in with a band of cruel marauders, and although he does his very best to amend their ways, he finds himself betrayed. As the curse dictated, every piece of counsel and advice that Turin gives leads people into death and destruction. Turin accidentally kills his best friend, he is fooled into abandoning the love of his life, he unknowingly marries and impregnates his sister, and despite his every effort to make something good out of his life, Turin cannot outpace the shadow of Morgoth. He changes his name and tries to recreate his identity again and again, trying to slip what he sees as his fate. He calls himself the Wronged, the son of ill fate, and finally, he calls himself Turin Turambar, which means the Master of Doom. By changing his name and claiming himself to be the master of his doom, Turin is trying to take ownership of what fate has thrown at him, but it doesn't manage to bring him any closer to contentment. Any and all efforts to settle or to make peace with himself are proved futile. Turin dies by his own hand, and it is proclaimed, "Ah, Turin Turambar, Turun Ambatanen, Master of Doom, by Doom mastered." While Morgoth didn't have the right to define Turin's fate, he did have the ability to manipulate the workings of the world to make all of his best efforts seem completely futile. Despite how much influence it would seem that Morgoth's doom had upon Turin's life, everything that happened to him was inevitably the result of his own choices, not of the movings of fate. Morgoth may have been the one to set the sword upon the ground, but Turin was the one who chose to throw himself down upon it. Free will may seem a blessing, but it is also a terrible responsibility, especially when it seems that all of your work, your effort, your attempts to live a just life come to naught. Turin's story is proof that although men have free will, they cannot escape the effects of fate, both actual and perceived, within their lives. But fate is not always a negative thing, and as we move out of the doom and gloom of the Silmarillion into a more optimistic story like The Lord of the Rings, we can see the ways in which weird is sometimes a comfort. When telling Frodo about the ring and the long, convoluted journey it took to get to Frodo's hand, Gandalf says, "Behind that, there was something else at work, beyond any design of the ring maker. I can put it no plainer than by saying that Bilbo was meant to find the ring, and not by its maker, in which case you were also meant to have it." And that may be an encouraging thought. But it's important to remember that fate was not the thing that made Frodo the ring-bearer. As a derivative of the human race, Frodo also has the God-granted right to a free choice, and although he absolutely was affected by any number of biases and outside factors, as we all are when we make any choice, he did absolutely freely choose to become the ring-bearer. As Elrond explains, "I think that this task is appointed for you, Frodo, and that if you do not find a way, no one will, but it is a heavy burden, so heavy that none could lay it on another. I do not lay it on you. But if you take it freely, I will say that your choice is right, and though all the mighty elf friends of old, Hador and Hurin and Turin and Beren himself were assembled together, your seat should be among them." It's no small thing that Elrond compares Frodo to Hador, Hurin, Turin, and Beren, these great men of old that made astonishingly bold decisions in the face of seemingly immovable fate. No, Elrond makes it clear, Frodo was not predestined to be the ring-bearer. It was a role that he freely chose, but once he had chosen it, fate now dictated that he was the best person for the job. But being chosen by fate doesn't mean that the journey ahead is easy. From choosing to pass through the mines of Moria, to choosing to split with the Fellowship, even choosing to save Gollum's life, Frodo is put on the spot to make decisions again and again, never being told by any divine forces whether or not the thing that he's choosing is the right thing. And even then, it's not like fate can save Frodo from having his will slowly eroded by the power of the ring. But even with his free will slowly slipping out of his fingers, even with the weight of the world upon his shoulders, Frodo makes the right choices. He does the small, humble actions required for fate to take the wheel. As Tolkien describes, Frodo had done what he could and spent himself completely as an instrument of providence, and had produced a situation in which the object of his quest could be achieved. His humility with which he began, and his sufferings were justly rewarded by the highest honor, and his exercise of patience and mercy toward Gollum gained him mercy. His failure was redressed. Frodo's path was not governed by fate, but his consistently right choices allowed him to become an instrument of providence, which means that despite his personal failure, fate and providence made sure that everything went right, and however unlikely, a happy ending was able to be achieved. It's reminiscent of this conversation that Frodo and Gandalf have. "I wish it need not have happened in my time," said Frodo. "So do I," said Gandalf, "and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us." According to Tolkien, it seems that to be human means recognizing that the great cogs of fate and destiny are too large, too strong, and have far too much momentum for any single one of us to stop them or to change their course. All that we can do is our very small part. All that we can do is make the decision that is right before us in the best way that we know how, and trust that whatever tiny difference we make, That's the difference that we were meant to make. After all, Tolkien makes it clear that not choosing, that using our free will to intentionally not make these choices, is the greatest evil of all. There's a reason that his most monstrous villains, Morgoth and Sauron, are both obsessed with control. They think that their will is the superior will. They think that they should be the only ones making choices, and they are willing to strip every other person of their own rightly ordained free will in order to make that happen. Tolkien explains Sauron's motivations. He did not object to the existence of the world so long as he could do what he liked with it. He loved order and coordination, and disliked all confusion and wasteful friction. The One Ring, as the embodiment of Sauron's power, is entirely bent on dominating others' wills, on manipulating a person's wants and needs, and removing their ability to freely choose. And domination isn't the only sin, it is also a sin if you freely choose to give up your will to another. You have to remember the orcs and the humans to the east and the south, who were not fundamentally evil, but became evil when they chose to surrender themselves to Sauron's power and his domineering will. Vulnerable and frightened by their individual powerlessness, they traded their will into the will of the Dark Lord, foregoing freedom for slavery, and thus they are all damned to fail as Sauron is. It is proven in this story again and again that desiring power for power's own sake can only lead to ruination. So it is in the case of Saruman. And actually, he and Gandalf produce a really interesting spectrum when it comes to the interaction between leadership and free will. After all, the Istari, which is the wizards, were incredibly powerful Maiar spirits, sent down to Arda not to lead or to dominate or to control, but to guide, to foster the native power of the free peoples of Middle-earth, and to set them on the path towards success. But for Saruman, that wasn't enough control, because he thought that he always knew best. He wanted not to guide or to suggest, but to control, and it was that lust for domination that put him directly in Sauron's crosshairs. As his antithesis, Gandalf held true to his assigned role, always there to guide and to offer counsel, but steadfastly refusing to make decisions on behalf of the free peoples, for good and for bad. Whether they were going to succeed or come to ruin, Gandalf would not deny them the right to freely choose their own fate. At one point or another, most of Middle-earth's heroes will find themselves in this incredibly emotionally fraught place between fate and free will. After all, something like fate is very hard to see when it is happening to you. The machinations and operations of destiny are something that you can really only see in a big picture format, when you can zoom out and look at everything that has happened and everything that will happen. When you are in the story, when you are simply making the choices set before you again and again, it is much harder to get a grasp of the impact that fate has on your personal life. It's not so easy to see how the prophecies might be realized. It's not easy to see who you are meant to be. But for Tolkien, this was a very familiar struggle, both on a personal level and within the literature that he held most dear. In the old stories, like the Volsunga Saga, the Kalevala, and Beowulf, we often see our heroes put between a rock and a hard place, forced to make a truly terrible decision. They must choose between allowing their kingdom to be completely destroyed by a dragon, or facing that dragon themselves and risk dying and abandoning their people to the wolves. And although in many of these stories, the hero isn't choosing between a right option and a wrong option, both options are wrong in some way, the right thing for them to do is at least to choose one of those things. Like the Norse gods battling it out to the bitter end despite knowing they were doomed for failure, true bravery means spitting in the face of inevitability, taking up arms, and keeping up the good fight, no matter what fate decrees. As Bertha Philpotts describes it, the quality of a man is not known until he is sore beset, either by defeat in battle or by being placed in a situation in which he must do violence to his sense of right. Fate can put men and women into positions whence it seems impossible for them to emerge with honor. They are judged by their choice, still more perhaps by the steadfastness with which they carry out their chosen aim, never looking back. The aristocracies of the Nordic people felt that man's will was free and therefore in some way superior to the fate that crushes him. So it is that all of the heroes of Middle-earth are faced with terrible choices, but still must choose. Feanor knew very well that doom was upon him, but he still fought tooth and nail to keep what he thought he deserved. Turin got back up again and again, no matter how often his best efforts went awry, and Frodo took the ring, even knowing that by the end he may very well fail to withstand its influence. In this northern mode of thought, the results of a hero's actions are not what defines his heroism. Rather, what defines his heroism is the fact that he knew failure was an option, possibly even an inevitability, and yet he still chose to play his part in that story. Now, what's interesting here is that Middle-earth is not entirely a pre-Christian, nihilistic, weird-driven world. Inspired somewhat by the Christian god, Iluvatar is an omnipotent, omniscient, and benevolent creator. And he makes it clear from the very beginning that his plan, his universal destiny, is something that ends in good. At the conclusion of the Song of the Ainur, after Morgoth has woven in his treachery, his pain, and his discord into the very tapestry of history and time, Iluvatar tells him, "And thou, Melkor, shalt see that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful which he himself hath not imagined." Fate in Middle-earth is often seen as a kind of cruel force, a brutal, immovable thing, but if we're to take Iluvatar at his word here, all of this pain and all of this hurt is leading towards a catastrophe, a great, powerful, happy ending in which, despite all of the pain and fear and badness, everything does go right. There's no easy solution for this push and pull between fate and free will. There is an ambiguity there, and I think that's done intentionally so, because that's also how Tolkien saw the real world. Tolkien was a devout Catholic, and he believed in salvation, that when the day of reckoning came, God would take all of the chaos and madness of the world and turn it into eternal good. But this firmness of belief was balanced out by the ways in which Tolkien struggled to see how his own life, his own experiences, and his own time could truly be contributing to such a happy story. Tolkien did not have an easy go of life. By the age of 12, both of his parents had died. He never quite felt settled in the world, and one of his only guiding lights from a very young age was the hope that God held some kind of a higher purpose for him. With his childhood friends in the TCBS Literary Club, they all planned how together they would change the world. They would create art and music and literature that would spark a new renaissance in human creativity and imagination. But before they could get around to changing the world, the war began. Tolkien and his friends were sent off into one of history's most brutal and bloody battles, and within just a few years, all but Tolkien and one of the members of the TCBS had been killed. Writing after the death of one of his closest friends, Rob Gilson, Tolkien really seemed to be struggling to figure out what all of these terrible things could mean. I now believe that if the greatness which we three certainly meant, and meant as more than holiness or nobility alone, is really the lot of the TCBS, then the death of any of its members is but a bitter winnowing of those who were not meant to be great, at least directly. The greatness I meant was that of a great instrument in God's hand, a mover, a doer, even an achiever of great things, a beginner, at the very least, of large things. In letters like this, and in his future writing, Tolkien is never quite able to focus in on what he or any of his peers were meant to do, on what exactly this greatness was, and how the terrible things that they had experienced and seen could contribute to the greatness that he thought they were destined for. His ongoing experiences, his ongoing traumas, seem to have rocked his perception of the world. Fate seems like a blurry thing to him. He's no longer able to see how all of this could possibly work out for the best. But behind all of this well-earned angst is an undying belief that hopelessness is not an option. Even when the picture is unclear and the path ahead is dark and uncertain, Tolkien seems sure that we need to keep going forward. We need to keep making the choices that are put before us. Our actions may seem small and futile to us on an individual and everyday level, but Tolkien puts his faith in the idea that even the smallest and most insignificant amongst us are still capable of becoming instruments in the devising of things more wonderful that he himself hath not yet imagined. Middle-earth is not Tolkien's theological treatise. If you're looking to dive really deep into the philosophical and theological debate between free will and fate and predestination, I don't have time to get into that in this video, and Tolkien was not intending to solve that problem through his writings. If you are looking for exact answers, or an essay on how to live your life, or a self-help book, Tolkien's works are not going to answer those questions for you. They're not meant to. Rather, I think that Tolkien's works function as a marvelously artistic expression of how this struggle between free will and fate made Tolkien feel. His characters never quite come around to understanding how all of this works because Tolkien himself didn't have it figured out and never quite would figure all of it out. Beyond a few fairly definitive statements from the mouth of Iluvatar himself, Tolkien's characters are muddling through their lives and their purpose just as much as we are. Tolkien introduces a paradox here. An impossible-to-solve equation, a constant weight, and a comfort to all those living within the world. If Tolkien had set out a clear answer, if he had said, fate is real and all humans live predestined lives, that would have been untrue. But it would have been equally untrue if he had chosen to ignore this problem entirely for the sake of creating a cleaner narrative. Fantasy at large, and especially the fantasy of Tolkien, is at its very strongest when we see it as a pair of eyeglasses, as a thin sheet of glass through which we can peer at what is real, something that distorts our sight just enough that new details fall into place, distant mountains or words on a page suddenly snapping into new clarity. It isn't the job of a pair of glasses to tell you what you're looking at, or how you should interpret it, but a pair of eyeglasses, or a really good story, might just help you see what you've always been seeing a good deal clearer. This is one of those topics that really bends my brain, and I was thinking myself in circles trying to write this video. But I will say that, akin to Tom Bombadil or Ungoliant or Where the Entwives Are, I think this is one of those little mysteries that Tolkien very intentionally put into his story. One of those unanswerable questions that people are going to be debating for the rest of time. And I do think that's a good thing. I think it's good for the human mind to recognize that there are some questions, some problems that there will never quite be a clear answer to, even if that is a little bit frustrating as a know-it-all. But please go ahead and share your thoughts on this matter in the comments. From Gollum to Luthien, pretty much every character in Middle-earth has some kind of an interaction or struggle with this question. So go ahead and let me know what you think. If you'd like to do some further reading on this topic, all of my sources are linked in the description as always. I especially recommend checking out an essay by Verlyn Fleeker, The Music and the Task. It's a great read, and she helped me make a lot of sense out of all of this. And I will be linking a PDF copy of the Bertha Philpotts essay that I cited earlier in this video. That is one of my favorite essays ever, and it helped a lot of things snap into place for me when it came to Tolkien's influence and his inspirations. So for anyone that is philosophically invested in Tolkien and his stories, I highly, highly recommend checking out this essay because it's a really great read. I am losing my voice more and more, and yesterday I woke up and I had done something to my neck, which meant I can't really look to the left without excruciating pain. So I guess that means I should probably close this video out. Getting old is so fun. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and send it to your friend who is the biggest theology nerd that you know. And do consider subscribing if you want to tune in every week to hear me talk about The Lord of the Rings, the art of storytelling, and the other stuff that I like to talk about. Thank you so much for joining me this week and every week, and I hope that you have a very happy, hobbity day.